One of the pushbacks on a theistic view of the world, as I understand it, is that in a multiverse or an infinite number of multiverses, which I think I've heard people say, I'm sure that's a good assumption, but that anything can and will happen, and therefore the fact that we live in a universe in which life exists on a planet, even if it is only a single planet, is to be expected, and you don't need God to explain that. How would you respond to that?
Well, that's, you know, in general, I agree with the initial assumption is that if given a large enough sample, anything that can happen will happen. I mean, that's just, we see multiple instances of statistics where given a large enough sample size, it fills the realm of, or the range of the sample size. There is an implicit assumption built into that, is in that what we see here on Earth is just a reflection of natural processes. I actually think if I were to redo it now, except for the fact I like physics, I would probably go into neurophysics, because I think that's one of the areas where, as we understand how the mind works, the mind and the brain and all of that discussion, I think we're going to find increasing evidence that there's a physical component that we can explain about who we are, but there's something beyond that as well, that we're a union of mind and body, if you will, or mind, or that we're not just a brain, we're a brain and a mind. And so if that's the case, then no amount of rearranging all the atoms in the universe is ever going to produce a mind. It may produce brains, but it'll never produce minds. And that gets at where, if we're going to say, well, the multiverse explains our existence because everything that can happen does happen, we also have to talk about all the other things that can happen. Because in that model, where our human, in the naturalist model, if you will, where humanity, or our human minds, are just a outcome of our brains given the right arrangement of atoms, you now have out in the multiverse, everything that can happen does happen, right? So you've got thermal fluctuations where all the atoms required for a brain fluctuate into existence, assemble in the right, or are assembled in the right thing, and the brain, this brain that's out in the vacuum of space, now becomes conscious. The probabilities of that are incredibly small, but the probabilities of us coming about are also incredibly small. So if the multiverse solves one, it solves the other. So now you've got this question in the multiverse, in this naturalist model, where you have to ask the question, not can the multiverse explain why we're here? You also have to explain why we're here and not all the other life that the multiverse might produce, like these Boltzmann brains that I just described. And it turns out most of the way, or it seems like the bulk of the ways of counting Boltzmann brains far outnumber minds like we have. And if that's true, so if we're a Boltzmann brain, one, we're a weird Boltzmann brain, so you still end up with this kind of fine-tuning argument. And if we're not a Boltzmann brain, you end up with fine-tuning, a fine-tuning argument. And then you also have to account for the fact that we might just be simulations. And so to use the multiverse, well, everything that can happen explains why we're here, you can't do that in the context of, well, we just have to explain life. You have to explain why we're here and we're not all this other stuff, which would be the more likely outcome. And so I still think even in the multiverse, you get a fine-tuning argument. It's just different because of the sample size is much, 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 much larger.